Welcome to the Leadership Series, Observations from the Frontline of Leadership in the NFP Sector. Today, my guest is Dr Dianne Jackson. I've known Dianne for a number of years and watched how she's navigated leadership roles from government to academia and not-for-profits and peak bodies as well. I've invited her along today because she's got a breadth of leadership experience across all these different perspectives, and I thought it would be great for us to catch up again. Unfortunately, not in person because we're back down in lockdown, where she can share some of her thoughts on leadership. So welcome very much, Dianne. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Liska.
So I'm going to kick off. So CEOs lead from the front. What are the most important decisions that you make as a leader in your business, Dianne?
I think one of the most important things that I've learned over the years now in many different contexts is that, yes, CEOs lead from the front, but I think there's a fair degree of leading from the middle and from behind. So I think there are moments when you have to really step up into the front position, but there's many more moments, I think, that require you to, and when I say from behind and from the middle, I guess that probably reflects my thinking around listening and reflecting and not necessarily being the vocal leader.
Yes.
So I think my particular leadership style has been very relational, and relationships for me require that you really listen a lot, but that you reflect as a person who you are and what you bring into a relationship. And I think the more that you are able to know yourself, reflect on what you bring to a relationship, what your effect on other people is, the more that you are actually leading from the front, but people don't necessarily see it as you being very vocal or leading from the front.
So how do you as a leader ask for feedback on your leadership style?
So again, very relational. So if I'm thinking about direct reports, I ask the question, but I often ask it in a way that really shows where I'm coming from in terms of the relationship. So I'd probably say something about, in the context of our relationship in this particular working environment, what do you need from me to best support you, and what things could I do more of, what things could I do less of, what should I stop, what should I begin? I often start from that perspective.
Because I think, I think what you're actually talking about here is building trust. Because to give feedback that means something, is meaningful feedback and honest, and sometimes has an edge that we go, because when we learn, we hear something that we don't like, typically.
Yes.
And to get your direct reports to trust you enough that it's okay for them to say that. So,
yes.
So we're back in lockdown here in Sydney in August 2021. And, COVID's changed the way that we work. And I think this time round, we had almost thought COVID was done. We were all going back to work. What have you done differently? And what have your staff needed from you?
So that was a really interesting question. That is an interesting question for me, because I have been in this particular role just on 12 months now. And I started the role of a national CEO in COVID conditions where I couldn't actually meet my teams at all. I've only been able to do that sort of in the last few months before we went into this current lockdown. But I was lucky in the previous position that I was leading a solely remote-based team. So I had actually learned quite a bit about leadership in an online digital environment from that experience that I then brought to the new role. So it was serendipitous, really, that I had that experience. But what I learnt through that, and I've learned it through the last 12 months as well, you need lots of connection points. So it does go to that relationship point that I was making earlier. but you need to do it. Like online meetings tend to make you want to just go into very transactional mode, and you go through the motions, or you do the work, but it doesn't elicit really lighthearted social responses like you might have if you were in a room.
Yeah.
But you can actually have that, and I think the more that you allow yourself and others to have that, the more you create it. But what I did in my last role, and I've instigated it here too, was to have a lot more almost stand-up. So I borrow a bit from agile approaches and huddles, and we're going to be online for 15 minutes. Let's do this and make it, let people have social interaction. Let's talk about what you did on the weekend. It sounds kind of common sense, but it doesn't happen easily when you're not used to being in a digital environment. The other thing that I have, I think, learned, and being the age I am now, like I have a certain generational perspective from my own generation, but what I know about working and learning from younger colleagues is it doesn't faze them anywhere near as much as it phases my generation not to be in a room with people. So I think there's a generational thing there that I've learned about.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. If someone had said to me they were representing candidates or clients that they'd never met in person and it was just over the computer, if someone said that to me 5 years ago, it was like, well, you're not doing your job properly. Whereas now I've placed people all over the country and CEOs in New Zealand, and it's just that's how we do business. So it really has changed. You work in out-of-home care and residential care, and in that out-of-home care space, which is it's working with the most vulnerable, I think, kids.
Yeah.
Has that and the way you support your staff, how have you done that in a way that's meaningful to them when it's tricky work that they're doing?
It's tricky work, and so of course, because of the nature of the work, there have been some people that potentially haven't really locked down like more managerial or administrative staff would. So they've certainly needed to be supported in different ways around wellbeing, around safety, around their own personal feelings about being exposed, like all sorts of things like that. I mean, we're a national organisation and we have very good state directors in each state who have really done just a marvellous job at actually knowing their teams and knowing what individuals in their teams really need. Yeah. I think one of the things that's been an interesting learning that I hadn't considered at all until coming out of lockdown and going back into lockdown was that when people were in lockdown, people put in, the first time around, people put in a lot of things around making connection and huddles and team meetings and extra things, put a lot of thought into that. When we came out, we sort of went to this hybrid way of working. So, and lots of workplaces have gone down that route. But what has happened in that is some of the connection things fell off because we thought, we're back hybrid. We're in the office sometimes, but you don't necessarily connect the way you did when everyone was in an office all the time together. And so there's been some interesting learnings about why wouldn't we just keep the things that we had when we were in hard lockdown going, because it's actually good for wellbeing, it's good for connection. It's good for a whole lot of things. So there have been some of the learnings. The other thing that we really learnt in our particular organisation from was the Victorian experience. So our Victorian office had 112 days of lockdown. We were doing all sorts of things nationally to support them with wellbeing packs and all sorts of things like that helped people get through, but also just letting them share their learnings back to us, and now they're sort of going, New South Wales, you'll be fine. Not even near halfway through the amount of days that we had. So I think there's a bit of a collegiality thing that has happened that no one would have planned for. But there's probably other more, sinister's not the right word, but darker side of this for people, if you live alone.
Yep.
And you're just stuck in your house by yourself all the time and you can't get out further than 10 kilometres anywhere. If you're a person in those circumstances and you also are doing the frontline, hardline work, what does that mean for you? How do you actually look after yourself in that? If your home isn't a safe home, your own home isn't a safe home. And I think that's coming out right across the sector.
Yep. And, I was talking to a couple of friends and we were just talking, it is highlighting those issues about safety at home, about having a home to work in, because, when you've got an office to go to, it can also hide transient housing, casualisation of the workforce. So there are all these other things that CEOs are having to deal with as well. So, you talked about that unexpected collegiality that was coming out from your team, running this national business that you do. Because my next question was, well, what have the silver linings been? And so it sounds like that's one, unexpected collegiality. Have there been any others?
I think there's been a lot of people who have realised that if you can have a flexible working arrangement with your employer and a hybrid model that works for everybody, then there's a lot better balance for them. There's, less commuting, all the things, we're reading lots and lots of things from all sorts of authors on this at the moment. How you get it right, there's pitfalls around that. But I think, myself included, I have really realised how much you neglect the other aspects of your life when you haven't got time and you're on a plane all the time or you're in the car all the time. And how do we bring that as a to keep that habit going, those good habits going. And I think people are recognising that and talking about it and asking for it. And I think that's a fantastic thing, because I don't think we almost sometimes thought of people who ask for those things as not quite wanting to do the job properly, but it's not that at all. It's and it actually feeds, personally for me, in terms of leadership and leaders in our sector. I think you really need to be mindful and looking after yourself first to be a good leader. And this has been a realisation, at least around amongst my management colleagues, that maybe just being flat out all the time and not looking after yourself properly isn't actually great leadership. So there's some things about that I think have been really good learnings and things that people are talking about that maybe they weren't talking about before.
I think that mental health, mental well-being or mental fitness has come out as a conversation to have, because we're all having to be far more conscious about it. So to your point, that well-being piece on all fronts certainly seems to have been an upside. And going back to what you were saying right at the beginning, trust to have those conversations, and it's okay. We're whole beings that come to work, not just a work being. You talked earlier about that relationships are fundamental to your leadership style. As a CEO, you can only touch so many people directly, and most likely your leadership team, and then it's driving culture through influence and the work that you do with your team, which is the leadership team. So as a CEO, how do you shape culture? Because, by talking to I host these round tables and culture just keeps on coming up as a conversation. How do we maintain what we had when everybody's everywhere? It's something that we're grappling with as a business because we have a very strong culture. So how do you consciously or unconsciously shape and influence the culture? Is there anything that you've done or anything that you think you want to do?
So it's an interesting question for me in this particular role, because I came into the organisation at a particular point in time. I instigated a functional review against the strategy just as one of my first things that I did as the new CEO in the organisation. And very quickly out of that fell the need to have a chief of people and culture. Yep. So the organisation hadn't had one before, had really good other structures that would fall into that portfolio. But we decided very early on to invest in that, and it was the best thing that we could have done. And it brought new conversations, but it also, there was probably a concurrent aspect to that for me, because I'd come into an organisation where it was quite remarkable, the intangible feeling of culture that I got when I walked into this organisation. And I've walked in as a new person into many organisations over the years, and all of which had, very good cultures. But there was something tangible about this particular culture that I thought, there's something there. People stay for a long time. They are passionate about the organisation, all the things that you want people to, and there it is, and what is that about? How do we harness that? How do we leverage that? But also then, how do we grow this thing called culture? And as you say, it's got to come right from the top, but the top only has certain influence to a certain level really on the day-to-day. So how do you have that cascading down through? And we're on a particular journey now to answer that question for ourselves, really, and to go, well, what do we, this culture just isn't a particular thing, or people read culture, and if you say chief of people and culture, they go HR, there's all sorts of interpretations, but it's all of our people, all of our clients, all of our carers, all of our contractors. It's everybody that we interface with, and how do you have a culture like that? And I think it's been interesting, because the decision at the highest level of the organisation to invest in people, that's what, not just getting a position, but to invest in people, has been a significant message that has cascaded down through all parts of the organisation, and that feedback is coming back. I guess as we go forward and as we strive to continuously improve what we're doing, and we monitor all of this work, we'll get more nuanced knowledge about it, and probably I hope to build our own evidence around some of this stuff.
And evidence, that's something that I think is a theme in your career. It wouldn't surprise me if I look at the roles that you've had in the organisation
that's true.
that you've worked for. And it is interesting, because from where I sit, I'd say marketing and HR, putting aside CEOs, if you look at from a division, they have been employee communication, that side of marketing and HR, they've been the busiest two departments, particularly when COVID first hit. And I find it still really interesting that large organisations that don't have a people and culture person on their leadership team, and when you do have someone, it says, this is important to us. As you say, it sends a message to the organisation. So, alrighty. So then board. So in not-for-profits, as a CEO, your future is very entwined, or your working day with the board and the culture of the board. Do you think they have a role in determining culture?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't see how you can really get it right without them actually backing management's thinking on this, but also demonstrating and role modelling right from the top. It's so important. It always is in anything that you do. And so it can become a real issue if there's a disconnect between what management is thinking along those lines, and if a board is going, oh, well, no, the financial part of the organisation is far more important. We need to focus here on our fiduciary responsibilities. I'm lucky to have a board presently that actually sees the culture almost as part of their fiduciary responsibility and the governance role of the board. And so they ask the right questions. They are absolutely spot on in terms of a governance role, but in terms of being open, and I think that's the other thing, being open to new ways of thinking. You just said it then. There's lots of organisations that don't have a senior leadership person in the people and culture space, and there's a bit of a journey to come on with people to understand why that would be as important as you would be, saying that it is. But the proof's always in the pudding, and, bringing a different level of thinking to that table and then into the boardroom opens up all sorts of possibilities. And I think there's a dual responsibility for management and the board and the governance part of the organisation to work closely on this particular issue.
Do you think that there's any one practical thing that because it's hard, you know, the chair has that close working relationship with the CEO. Your board meets once or twice a month, you know, once a month or once every couple of months. Your executive get invited along to do their presentation and then they leave. You know, is the most practical thing that they can do is to endorse the investment in a chief of people and culture, or is there something else that you would love a board to do, or that you've seen your board do that embodies culture or that commitment to culture?
So I think the investment's really important, because that's you know, that always says something. Yep. and it's a very loud message. I've experienced this done in different ways in different organisations. I often think where there's an opportunity to do it at the right level with the right people at the right time, an immersive experience is a good thing for a board to actually, if you've got the ability to sit down with the board, the senior executive, other people in the organisation, for the board to hear what the outcome was of that. So what's the impact? It's about telling the impact story.
Yeah. No, that's really good.
Yeah, and I think, that's right across the board with any sort of issue, I guess. But I think, you know, that's what in this current organisation, that's what I would be aiming for, you know, 12 months down the track. But I know in other organisations that I've been in, that sort of immersive way of seeing what the outcome is and the impact of their investment decision. So you're linking the impact to their direct investment decision. That's always a powerful thing.
Well, it's interesting because those words, impact of investment decision, we normally talk to funders. It's around, let's build some evidence so that when we go for that pilot program or that, how can we help you, and here's the data. It's nice to hear it turned around and done it internally as well. I think that's a very... I like that. I like that thinking. I think there's something to learn from that one. You know, you've navigated leadership roles across academia, peak bodies, NFP, a number of board appointments. So apart from building relationship, what's the commonality across those organisations from a leadership perspective?
I think being clear on why you're in the position that you're in. So what is the purpose of the organisation? Do you really share the values and the aspirations of any organisation that you're in? Because I think it's hard to be a good leader if you really don't believe in what you're leading. And that might sound like really pretty 101, you know, common sense, but many people find themselves in those positions. And to be honest, I've left positions because I didn't, you know, not in the recent past, but I've left positions when I've thought, actually, this doesn't actually align to my personal beliefs or shared vision for something.
And I think, you know, Dianne, I think in the world of not-for-profits, when boards change, directors turn over or refreshed and chairs change, that, you know, there can be that reorienting of an organisation as well because of their experience, their influences and their perspectives. And then you're right, there can be that maybe this is time for us to part ways. And I think that's one of the hardest things about being a CEO, is that you're having to navigate cultural changes at a board level that impact what you're trying to deliver as well.
Absolutely.
So what's your best habit as a person?
My best habit, riding my horse on the weekend. Look, you know, I say that flippantly, but I think my best habit is what I've learned over the years is that I need to quarantine myself away from thinking about work.
Yeah.
And so I've, you know, for me it's you know, horse riding and being in the paddock and all of that stuff. But there's something about you have to be really mindful in those situations. It's like meditation. It's like doing anything where it requires your whole mind to be on something that is not associated with work. Really gives you, it clears your mind, it gives you space to then come back to what you've got to do. And it's hard in a CEO role because there's so many demands on you and your time, and, you know, often just not enough time to do what you need to do. But I do make sure that every weekend I get some time where that happens.
So what is it that keeps you? You know, you've just said being a CEO is so all-encompassing. What keeps you in the chair?
I like the challenge. So there is a challenge thing there. I think that I've experienced really good success and successfully led people and organisations to achieve their mission, and there's something in that for me. I've come, you know, my background, I've come through working with children as a teacher, and then children and families, and then in very disadvantaged communities. I have been all over the place, as you said before. I've meandered all over the place in my career, but I have an underlying passion, I guess, to be able to somehow, in my own small way, improve things for people that are experiencing circumstances because of disadvantage or their circumstances. And I think that as I've come up into CEO roles, I see that I can lead people on their own journey to be able to do that, because not-for-profits are full of people like me that are passionate about making life better for other people, basically, if you want to boil it right down to that. And to be able to be in a position where I can lead people to fulfill that, but also lead them in a way that elicits leadership out of them. So some of my greatest achievements, I think, I felt like it have been achievements for me, have been where I've seen people in organisations that have come in, you know, they might have been running some little group thing in a park or something like that. They've just come in and they've had no aspirations, or not even an aspiration. They just haven't ever seen themselves in a way that changes over time, and then people picking that up and also just seeing, I think I've probably gone around a little bit of a circle here, but I think I have always viewed leadership as not just something that the CEO's got or somebody in management, or I think everybody is a leader, and it's great if everybody can see themselves in the leader, no matter as a leader, no matter what role they play, because I think you have to lead yourself and lead other people in any interaction you have in the workplace. And the more that you can develop that in people, or see that in people, or get them to see it in themselves, I think that's just a great achievement, and that's what keeps me around, really, actually.
So I suppose it comes down to that. If at the top you and the board provide clarity of vision, then the person at the bottom knows how they fit into that and what they can do to contribute to it.
I think so. And that I like to work very much from as much as possible from a non-hierarchical sort of positioning as well, because I think there's innovation, there's leadership, there's everything, there's gems of things at every level in an organisation that if you look for them, they're there. Often we just don't make sort of the conditions right for those things to shine. And if we're talking about, as we often do in the social sector, community-led development sort of stuff, and how do we work with the people that we are here to serve, we have to have that lens on things. And I think that's a leadership thing that I love to see people develop.
So that's the inspiration that you hope to provide sort of back into your organisation. Where do you draw your support and inspiration from as a leader? You know, what books, websites, people, practices?
So I've had some really good mentors over the years, and many of them have been the sort of, they might have had a sort of high profile in their field, but they've been sort of quiet achievers. So they'll be the person that sits in the boardroom and listens and watches and reflects and doesn't say much, but then when they actually open their mouth, they say the most profound thing that's been said in the last 2.5 hours. I've got a few people like that I've had close working relationships with that I've really, I think, learned a lot from over the years. I like people, and I like to look to people. It's probably in the public, if you went into the public realm, that have that sort of measured approach to the way they lead and the way they work and the way they view the world, and they speak about it like that and reflect on it like that. So there's probably characteristics more than actual, role models. And I think too, it's finding that thing that works for you. Like, I don't think you can just pick someone off the shelf and go, there are many people that I go, wow, look at that, wouldn't it be great? But I know that I could never be that person. And I don't try to be. I try to be authentic to who I know I am.
Is there any book, when I read Jim Collins's Good to Great, that really made an impact? And it's a classic. It's been around for a long time, but, that's always been a bit of a standout book. Is there anything that you would, because my next question I have is, what advice would you give to a first-time CEO? Is there anything, any books, readings, anything that you would say as part of your education, have a read of this or have a listen to this?
Look, I don't think there's any one thing for me, and I've always had a bit of an eclectic approach to things. I think my advice would be read everything that you want to and can get your hands on, but don't think that you need to do everything that you read and get your hands on. So it's a bit like kind of the whole parenting thing, when like you're about to become a first-time parent and everybody gives you every book known to mankind. You read it and you think, how am I going to do this? But actually see yourself in things, try to see yourself in things and go, that would work for me, but that wouldn't work for me. Because I think actually the best leaders that I've seen actually they mix and match to who they are. And what is more than taking a book and saying, I'm going to do it this way, is them going, I'm going to take a lot of time to really learn who I am and how I react to situations, and what do I look like when I'm really on my game and things are going well, and all of that. What do I look like when I'm stressed and the wheels are falling off, and what do I do in those circumstances? How do I come across to people? I think there's so much more about this that is about you getting to know yourself very well and then putting it into the context. I have, it's not one particular book, but I did the McKinsey Executive Leadership Program.
I saw that.
And one of the things that I really, what I'm saying now about really getting to know yourself, that was such the theme of that work. Yeah. And I had gone there doing that program, invited to do the program, so I hadn't really looked to do it, but I was invited to do it, and I did do it, and I was really glad that I did it. But it was so completely coming from an angle that I didn't expect it to be coming from. I thought I'd walk in there and it'd be business and strategy and all the things that a CEO's job is, but it didn't start there at all. And 2/3 of that course was about learning about yourself and learning how to be mindful, learning how to minimise distraction as a CEO, like all sorts of things like that. And then how to bring that into conversation with the people that you lead. And that was actually quite transformational in terms of, I think I'd done a lot of those things over the years, but I'd never put it into a context and then tied them together. And
it's around language for things that you innately know. Because, you talk, like we started this conversation about, and you used the word reflection. We're kind of finishing the conversation in this slightly different way, but reflection as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So I want to finish on, what's the bravest leadership decision you've ever had to make?
There's been several. Probably the bravest one that I had to make in more recent times was the decision through circumstances that were quite left field.
Yep.
But I had to take, as the CEO, I had to take a small organisation to wind-up stage. And we eventually were able to do an acquisition, but it was bringing a small team of very, very, very competent senior people on that journey, knowing that any one of us could have just gone, this is too hard. Like we had a long, fairly long lead time to what we knew was the cliff. And we had many conversations, and including, this is what is going to happen, this is the time frame. I am completely supportive of helping you look for another role if you want to look for another role. Just being really, really honest and knowing what was coming, and knowing what was coming for myself in that circumstances as well. Getting to the cliff and actually having to do what we did, which we came out the other end was fine, like the company's not there anymore. But every single one of those leaders stayed with me until
wow, that's amazing.
Not one person left. And we all went over the cliff together, and we all now have moved on to other successful, positions. But that was hard. Like that's hard when you've got your own personal stuff you're thinking about, and all the things that go around in your head around those circumstances. Whether or not just for your own financial good, you should just bail now and off you go. There's all those decisions that you would expect people in that situation to go through and react to and leave, but they didn't leave. And I think I learned some really important leadership lessons through that experience, and the fact that we all came out of it. So you talked about silver linings before. Now when I look back on that, it was horrible at the time. It was a really, really hard period of my working life. But man, oh man, I learned some stuff that I never would have learned in the McKinsey course. Like you don't learn, like they can tell you about it, but you don't learn that stuff until you actually have to do it. And I think that's something else to hang on to, that, through thick and thin, you are learning every day of your, professional life, new things. You never stop learning. There isn't really a playbook for this. I think everyone has to create their own playbook. And, the more that you can go, okay, well, it's a bit of the old, innovation thing, try it, fail fast, and then get up and do it again, some of that sort of stuff. And, some days are hard, and you can't get away from that.
And I think that's one thing through COVID is you had to try new things. And because we were operating in a world where this has never happened before. So it not that it was okay to fail, but it was okay to fail because we had never been there. And it was like, okay, well, how are we going to iterate this into its next thing? Well, that worked. Let's do a little bit of that. And so organisations, it's phenomenal what some organisations have done to keep going as a business, and sometimes they've thrived. To your point, they've just had to learn a new playbook. Dianne, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and may the second 12 months not be quite as eventful as the first 12 months.
Let's hope. Thank you for asking me. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Liska.
For more information, call us or visit our website beaumontpeople.com.au